What's up guys, it's your boy WB Videos 100 coming back to you guys with another video. So today we're going to be talking about WWE superstars who fought outside of the WWE, meaning they fought in real life. So number 1, let's get started with Kofi Kingston wanting to fight Vince McMahon. So according to Chris Jericho in his book called Best in the World at What I Have No Idea, Vince McMahon, the WWE's boss, decided to pick on Kofi Kingston before he was really a big deal. So during a plane ride, he came over and he said, maybe one day you'll get over to Kofi. This really pissed Kofi off, and then this started a jaw-jacking session between the two. Soon McMahon went for a double leg takedown, so basically a real life wrestling match was on. Thankfully though, no hard blows were thrown and Vince McMahon got back up, laughing at Kingston. He was happy that Kingston stood up for himself. So basically nothing really serious happening, but you know, Vince McMahon messing with one of his employees and he stood up for himself. So at number 2 we have Chris Jericho and Goldberg. So in 1998, Goldberg was a megastar in WCW. He destroyed opponents in under a minute. And Jericho played an arrogant, obnoxious, and cowardly villain, which the kind of troll fans would delight in seeing a man tank like Goldberg obliterate. But it never happened because Jericho explained on Ric Flair's podcast that Goldberg simply refused to work with him. So Jericho did a storyline where he would continually call out Goldberg, knowing he wasn't there. And one time he even defeated a little person dressed as Goldberg, but no match ever happened between the two. So years later, when both of them were in WWE, Goldberg decided to confront Jericho about the rumors that he had been trash-talking online. Insulted by the accusation and fueled by the bitterness over Goldberg big-timing him in WCW, Jericho refused to back down. Goldberg tried to choke the much smaller Jericho, who grabbed him in a front facelock and took him down. And then he added a body scissors, kept him down, and Jericho earned himself basically a real-life victory over a guy much bigger than him and who was known to destroy guys like him. Moving on to number 3, where we have Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. So before becoming one of the greatest wrestlers ever, Shawn Michaels was in a tag team with Marty Jannetty, and while the Rockers were popular and successful, they didn't always get along, and years after being together, they were apparently sick enough of each other to throw down for real. So nobody was really sure why Michaels and Jannetty fought in the early 90s. It's assumed that Roddy Piper said something that got them super heated, and their anger turned into a physical fight that Jannetty won quite easily. He managed to bruise and bang up Michaels because, as he explained in an interview years later, Shawn can't fight. He's a good wrestler, but he can't fight. And the fight actually got bad enough that the police had to intervene. According to Jannetty himself, he almost got hauled off to the cooler, and he can thank Macho Man Randy Savage for that not happening. Savage showed the cops that the Rockers were simply practicing for a storyline, and the starstruck cops agreed to let Jannetty go in exchange for some Savage autographs. That's actually pretty funny, I think, and Michaels reportedly quit the WWF due to his injuries, but he and Jannetty soon made up and he returned, but years later, Michael is a legend and Jannetty is the obscure, derided other guy. That's called winning the battle but losing the war. So I'm glad that the two made up, but it is pretty unfortunate how Marty Jannetty has a pretty bad reputation. Anyways, moving on to number 4. Now we're going to be talking about Sid Vicious versus Arn Anderson versus Scissors. So Sid Vicious fighting Arn Anderson is one of the most brutal real-life fight stories in wrestling history. This is going to be a good one. So according to Pro Wrestling Stories, in 1993, a group of WCW wrestlers were meeting to figure out why WCW was losing money. Vicious opined that old guys like Anderson and his best friend Ric Flair were making too much money. Anderson wasn't present at the time, and as you might expect, took exception to Sid's statement, so the two verbally went at it, though nothing really happened physically, at least not then. But later that night, Vicious found Anderson and began yelling at him again. The two went at it, brawling and rolling around in the hall of their hotel. Then Vicious grabbed a pair of scissors and began stabbing Anderson in the gut, causing blood to spill everywhere, and Anderson sputtered, "Man, you're effing killing me." Vicious also suffered several stab wounds during the fight and both needed surgeries and stitches. Damn. Talk about a real life storyline. I bet WWE wishes they could have captured that. Or WCW. Thankfully, both survived and avoided long-term injuries. Anderson merely received a suspension, but since Vicious was the instigator, he was outright fired. Considering he was in a main event feud with WCW World Champion Vader and was likely set up to win the title, bringing scissors to a normal fight was probably the stupidest decision of the man's life. I don't know why he would bring in scissors to fight someone. I mean, you can make it physical, you can punch someone, but when you bring scissors into the mix, that's when you know you've taken it too far. Moving on to number 5, and we're going to be talking about the late great Vader that recently passed away, so rest in peace, and of course my condolences. But we're going to be talking about the time Vader accidentally enraged Paul Orndorff. So sometimes wrestlers can do some things that can cause a simple misunderstanding and can trigger an unscripted and entirely unnecessary violence. And in 1995, this was the case between Vader and Mr. Wonderful. So Vader was late to a show and Mr. Wonderful was understandably angry about it. However, Vader had a great excuse. WCW's boss, Eric Bischoff, the infamous Eric Bischoff, had set up a company photo shoot for Vader and gave his approval for the Mastodon to be late that night. But Bischoff unfortunately forgot one of the most important aspects of running a business: communication, and he never ever told anyone of how Vader was going to be late. So he began yelling at Vader for his seemingly unprofessional behavior rather than explain himself. The temperamental Vader decided to get right in Mr. Wonderful's face, and he slapped the far larger wrestler, and the fight was on. Vader did his best to make sure the fight wasn't on, though. He observed the surroundings and concluded that it was too dangerous to fight, and he didn't want any risk of jail time. But Mr. Wonderful reportedly punched him. Vader finally had enough, grabbing him in a facelock that brought both men to the ground. After some scuffling, they were pulled apart, and the fight ended as quickly as it began. Vader was soon out of WCW, and we don't know if incidents like this played a role in his dismissal, but it's not the craziest theory in the world. Moving on to number 6. So, as you guys know, when superstars are as popular and successful as they are being in the WWE, some superstars can have a big ego. And apparently, Dave Bautista had a big ego. And in 2006, he was a big star at the time, having been the World Heavyweight Champion and everything. But he started growing really full of himself, which peaked while shooting a commercial for SummerSlam. He declared that SmackDown had risen in ratings lately. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening to my voice. And his appearing on this show was the reason why. This caused Booker T, who had won six world titles and main evented countless shows, to confront him about his stuck-up attitude. They argued back and forth for a few minutes and then fought for about 30 seconds. The fight didn't need to last any longer than that. While Booker suffered a black eye in the ruckus, Batista's face was completely cut up and his pride had evaporated. It's hard to act like a huge honkin' deal when getting completely owned by someone smaller and older than you. Still, there's a case to be made that Batista ultimately came out on top. So, Batista got the ego beaten out of him by Booker T. Moving on to number 7, we are going to be talking about a fight that happened between, are you ready for it, The Big Show and the Great Khali. Now, you'd expect this to be a great drag-out fight where they're knocking each other out and bodies are all over the place. But according to the Big Show, who appeared on Chris Jericho's podcast, which I listen to sometimes, and it's a great podcast, Big Show described it as, I quote, the worst friggin' fight on the planet. So Show had a cool signature move where he throws his opponents in the corners and shush the crowd, then deliver a thunderous shot to the chest that echoed throughout the arena, I'm sure that you guys know of. So Khali, without Big Show's approval, started doing the same thing, and Big Show wasn't too happy. He confronted Khali about the theft backstage. I actually did see this on TV, and I was wondering if Khali had asked Big Show. So now we're finding the answer. But Khali was unrepentant. The two began punching and smacking each other, and no wrestler broke them up because, as Jericho put it, it was like King Kong versus Godzilla. You didn't stop a fight like that unless you're Superman. The fight, however, soon ended itself in the dumbest manner possible. Show took a swing at Khali, tripped over a chair, and fell down. Khali somehow fell down too, landing directly on top of Big Show. The pile of giants then called the whole thing off, ending the fight in an amusing anticlimactic manner. And if you ask Khali, all the wrestlers took his side on the fight, and he made Big Show cry. That's almost certainly untrue, but it's a better story than we both fell over. That's a pretty interesting story by Big Show. So let's move on to number 8. Moving on to number 8, we're going to be talking about a fight that happened between Brock Lesnar, the Beast, and Curt Hennig, 35,000 feet in the air, so on an airplane, which a lot happened during WWE's notorious 2002 plane ride for hell. For example, Ric Flair drunkenly flashed flight attendants. But there was also an alcohol-fueled brawl between the legendary Mr. Perfect and Brock Lesnar, who was still a rookie but already one of the scariest men alive. You guys already know how great of a fighter Brock Lesnar is, winning championships in the MMA, or whatever it was. Yeah, I think it was the MMA. But we don't know a lot about what transpired between Hennig and Lesnar, but there's no pictures or video. The fight was overshadowed by antics like Flair's, and WWE doesn't want to talk about the plane ride anyway. But when Brock Lesnar appeared on ESPN's Highly Questionable in 2016, he mentioned it. As he put it, being stuck on an airplane for 7 hours. What else are you going to do besides fall asleep or get into trouble? We did both. Based on that, it seems very little to make the two angry at one another, aside from being drunk and getting into their heads that they had to rumble. According to various reports, such as the one from Daily DDT, the pair very nearly hit the plane's emergency door while rolling around. Had that opened up, it's very possible the plane ride from hell could have turned tragic rather than simply sad. Luckily, that never happened, but unluckily, Hennig lost his job over the whole episode. Brock Lesnar was spared punishment, presumably because he was a rookie, not to mention a guy Vince McMahon had long-term main event plans for already. Wow, that is very interesting. So, number 9, we're going to be talking about a fight that... So, few wrestlers have bigger egos than Marcus Alexander Buff Bagwell's. Going back to the ego thing that I talked about earlier with Batista. A lot of people could have gotten away with that in WCW, but once he moved to the WWF in 2001, his pride proved his undoing. He worked maybe 2 matches before getting fired, but even in the brief period, he managed to get into a real-life fight. As fellow ex-WCW wrestler Shane Hurricane Helms recalled during an appearance on Sam Roberts' wrestling podcast, he and Bagwell went at it while both were in the WWF for infamous WCW Invades WWF storyline. We don't know what happened that triggered the fight, but mostly because Helms wouldn't say, but it started with a verbal altercation that escalated into a physical one. It wasn't much of a fight. Bagwell apparently hit Helms in the ear while attacking him from behind, and Helms responded by throwing a water bottle at him. The bottle was either frozen glass or water-filled plastic, but either way it resulted in Bagwell falling over, cracking his head on the pavement, and needing 20 stitches. As for Helms, he earned exactly what you might not expect, total respect from his peers. As Helms said, he came to work the next day and placed his bags with the other WCW wrestler stuff. Steve Austin saw this, picked up Helms' bag, and brought them over to the WWF side. The implication was as clear as Austin was bald. The Hurricane was now one of them. So the Hurricane actually gained acceptance because of this fight. So good for him. And that is it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And also to check out the Wealth Consciousness page that I recently launched. That is at wealth.consciousness, at wealth.conscious. Make sure to check it out. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And I think I'm going to launch a clothing line soon. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate it. And I'm out.